Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network 𝐾𝐚𝐯 Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrosian, and along with 𝐵𝐞𝐗 Manoucharian, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics. Wait, did Armenia use the Iskander to blow up its relations with Russia? Wait, was there a coup? The opposition picks up steam. And wait, was the 737 hijacked?
And to talk about these issues, we have with us David Davidian, who is a lecturer at the American University of Armenia. He has over a decade of experience in technical intelligence analysis in major technology firms, and David was the first person to use the internet for Armenian causes. George Tabakian, who is the co-founder of Repat Armenia Foundation and Sahman NGO, and executive director of RR Foundation, which works mainly on projects with the Ministry of Defense in Armenia. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello, 𝐵𝐞𝐗.
Hello.
So on Tuesday, February 23, Pashinyan gave an interview to Arachin.am, which is a large media outlet generally espousing anti-Russian viewpoints that is controlled by the National Assembly Deputy Arman Babajanyan. The interview itself appears to have been an opportunity for Pashinyan to respond to 𝐶𝐸 lengthy interview of last week, which we discussed on this podcast. And the most bombshell part of the interview was Pashinyan's criticism of the Iskander missile system. In response to this question about Armenia's use or non-use of the Iskander, Pashinyan asked why the Iskander missiles that were launched did not explode or only exploded 10%. And this is pretty puzzling because of the way it was phrased. And also, previously several prominent officials as well have given the indication that the Iskander was used, including General Moses Hakopian and Sir Sarkisyan, but it was used on the last days of the war, and namely around the vicinity of Shushi, as Shushi was being taken by Azerbaijan. So this allegation didn't sit well with Russia, for whom the Iskander is a weapon of pride, and what followed was a deluge of criticism and responses from Russian side. Russian government media in general criticized this as an attempt by Pashinyan to hurt Russia's international standing in Armenian-Russian relations. An engineer who worked on the design of the Iskander system directly made a statement ridiculing Pashinyan's claims about the effectiveness of the weapon and trying to explain it from a technological perspective. And the most surprising to me of all responses was Russia's claim that the Iskanders were not used at all, and all the missiles are stored currently in Armenia. And this was officially made as a statement by the Ministry of Defense. So, George, I wanted to start with you. This is utterly confusing. It seems that Armenia claims the Iskanders were used while Russia denies it. How do we decipher the truth here, and what's your assessment of this story in general?
Okay. First of all, let's talk about the Iskander itself. This is the pride and joy of the Russian army. Armenia is the only country which has the Iskander outside Russia. This is very important to note. So, because of our relations with them, we are the only country which has these missiles. And it was used very effectively in Syria, as we know. We have seen a lot of videos. Importantly, this system is regularly updated, regularly maintained. It's tested, and usually all these testings happen with the Russian experts in Armenia. Now, the absurdity started when Pashinyan claimed that only 10% exploded, which is very, I don't know how to describe this. This is a missile system. It cannot be 10% or 20% explosion. Either it will explode or it will not explode, first. Secondly, you can assess the damage it gave or the effect it gave only if you have access to the area where the missile was used. For example, if we are testing this missile in Armenia, in, let's say, an open area, after using the missile, we can go to the area and we can see what was the effect of that missile. But if this missile was used outside Armenia or outside the control of our armed forces, it's very, very difficult to understand what was the effect of this missile system. Okay, so to be clear, so the explosion of the 10% and all these fairy tales they have nothing related to reality. Now, the main question remains, was it used or not? To make it clear, officially, the armed forces never announced that this missile system was used. The claim started by General Moses Hakopian, who was not in the command, like in the direct command, but he had access to some information, and then it was reconfirmed by the previous president, 𝐶𝐸𝐶 Sarkisian. But the armed forces, they never confirmed the usage of this missile system. The last confirmation came from Pashinyan himself when he said, we used it and only 10% exploded. For me, when you are using a weapon which is exclusive sold to you outside Russia, so it gives you a privilege of having access to this weapon. So if there is any issue or any problem with that missile system, you don't just announce it to trash it and to put your partner in a very bad position. You discuss that with your partner, and I'm sure if there are problems, they will be solved, because this is something they are highly proud of. I mean, this is the Iskander, basically. So it is very clear that Pashinyan used this to retaliate back to 𝐶𝐸𝐶 Sarkisian, but mainly to criticize the Russians and to blame them on the outcome of this war, which is, I mean, he has been trying to do this for the past 3 months. Honestly speaking, I don't have any proof that this was used or not. I haven't heard anybody saying in the army saying that we used it. It was all people saying from like second party, basically people who have heard people saying we have used it. So honestly speaking, I don't want to confirm anything that I have no information of. Just to wrap it up with the Russian final answer saying that the Iskander was never used in Artsakh. I think if the missile was used, I think this was the way for the Russians to just close this topic and stop, the meaning of the reputation of this missile system. And Aliyev was very quick to come back and saying, you know what, we never saw the Iskander on our territory.
Right. Well, it wasn't just Artsakh. It was specifically used in Shushi. Do we know where it hit, if one was used?
Yeah, we've seen some video footage, but it's just a missile falling. So I don't know, how people can claim it was the Iskander.
Exactly. I mean, we can never know that. That I have seen that same video actually, and I cannot say that was the explosion of an Iskander. And mind that Pashinyan is saying only 10% has exploded, so that's another story.
David, so what is your take on the effect of this on Armenia-Russian relations? And let me just sort of say why, because given that this was a pre-recorded interview by Pashinyan on a friendly news media, and there are many people who saw the interview who say that the interview was edited heavily, and there was no official retraction or correction of Pashinyan's statements. Can we assume that Pashinyan intended for the statement to go out as it did? And what was his calculation in making that statement?
There's basically two issues. One of them is going back to what George is saying. It either wasn't launched or it was launched. However, there's one little caveat, and I'm wondering where the 10% came from. And let me give you just my thoughts on that. These type of weapons, while I don't have the user's manual, these type of weapons have a backdoor. They have backdoor access by the manufacturer. The same thing happened to Azerbaijani, I think, 4 missiles in 2016. They just didn't launch, or if they launched, they didn't really do much of anything, or they didn't explode. The same thing happened in 2013 to 2014 with Israeli-made UAVs. They just didn't work. I don't want to get into that, but the thing is that if, in fact, they were launched, or one was launched, if one was launched, we don't know, just like George is saying, we don't know. If one was launched, its explosive capability could have been shut off. The rocket could have reached its destination, and what would be considered 10% could be perhaps what was left of the fuel. But we don't know that. However, it's interesting. It's interesting that value was used. I have no idea where he got this 10% from.
Well, apparently, from some reports, there is a value of 10%, which is actually the decrease in potency, and apparently that's export restriction on the Russian side. But that's the only 10% that I've heard or I know about. And I wonder if the missiles that Russia has for itself are, 100% strength, for instance, and the ones that are provided to Armenia have 90%, essentially.
Yeah, there's basically 3 hypotheses here. One is they launched it. One, they didn't launch it. And third, it was launched, but it was during flight, it was reprogrammed not to explode. And what was left was, 10%, which is probably fuel, 8%, 12%, 15%, whatever it's going to be.
So yes, we don't know, but I guess the question is, even if he did know, why make a statement like this? What is the intention of his, statement?
Well, if he did make a statement like this, it's a plan. It's a plan. I'm sure he knew exactly what he was saying. Now, again, it's very strange. One of the things that probably anyone in politics in Armenia knows right now is that the Russians have a pretty major role in a very precarious situation. If people are blaming Russia for what happened to Armenia, this is not the thing to do. One would think, even if you're a village politician, you just keep your mouth shut sometimes. If Pashinyan was trying to, for lack of a better word, stick to the Russians, this is not the way to do it. Because the Russians are going to come back and say, obviously, that it wasn't launched, and that, obviously they're going to say it wasn't launched, because if it was launched and something happened to it, they're going to say it wasn't, there's no way they can say that. Now, the thing is that now that Pashinyan, just like you said, Pashinyan didn't correct anything. He said it and he went off. He didn't do anything to Sarkisyan. In other words, his response didn't deter Sarkisyan, or it wasn't an answer to Sarkisyan. Look what happened to it. Look what happened. Now, it's probably no surprise that we have the general staff, staff in response, and perhaps this is the response.
Yeah. So actually, that's a good segue into our next conversation, which is whether there was a coup or not. So, following that incident with the Iskander interview, the main news from this week was dominated by Pashinyan's allegations of an attempted coup against him by the military, specifically the chief of staff and top Armenian generals. Before addressing this issue, it's important to understand the backstory and how exactly this development unfolded. So let me just summarize the sequence of events as we know them. So on Wednesday, Pashinyan signed an order recommending dismissal of General Tiran Khachaturian, who is the first deputy chief of staff, and reportedly it was done due to the fact that he laughed at this Iskander claim. So a news media source asked a question of Tiran, and it was reported that he laughed profusely. So this order to dismiss Tiran Khachaturian was signed promptly by President Armen Sarkisyan. And next, apparently in response to this firing, the chief of staff of Armenian Armed Forces, 𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐢𝐝 𝐃𝐴𝐾, publicly demanded Pashinyan's resignation. The statement said, "The Armenian Armed Forces have long patiently tolerated the incumbent authorities' attacks aimed at discrediting the armed forces, but everything has its limits." It went on to explain more. So the statement from 𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐢𝐝 𝐃𝐴𝐾 was signed by most of the top brass, including the commanders of all 5 army corps. Pashinyan responded to this statement by signing an order to dismiss Gasparyan himself, qualifying Gasparyan's actions as the attempted military coup. And the Homeland Salvation Movement hailed the military statement, but we should clarify that the statement was carefully crafted not to support the opposition. For instance, in 2008, when Manvel and another general joined, the opposition, the opposition announced that, General Manvel is joining us. Here, the military said simply that Pashinyan should resign. So that's an important distinction. And even Edmond Marukian jumped into the fray, and his Bright Armenia parliamentary faction, they claimed that the statement does not qualify as an attempted coup. And another thing to mention is, unlike the Tiran Khachaturian's dismissal, which was signed immediately by President Sarkisyan, this one was not signed, and it was returned back to Pashinyan. In the return note, President Sarkisyan said that he sees issues with the constitutionality of the statement. Pashinyan then promised to submit the issue again to the president, and I think it's going to go to the Constitutional Court after this. So, David, are you aware of the procedural next steps in this game of ping pong? And what is your take on what has transpired? And in your opinion, does this qualify as an attempted coup?
No, this was obviously not a coup. As soon as it was clear that it wasn't a coup by the standard definitions of a coup internationally, the reports just ended on this, supposed coup. This is interesting. This is the second item. This is the second item that Pashinyan has thrown out. The first was the Iskander's, and the second, it's a coup. One of the things that does is that will tend to take pressure off of what's going on, or it will firm up whatever his support is, including the Turkish Foreign Ministry. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen at the Constitutional Court, because if you recall, even a year ago, there were reports that he was trying to put his guys into the Constitutional Court. There was some fights going back and forth. I don't know if he succeeded. I really can't tell. But this is interesting, because if in fact this does go to the Constitutional Court, that means again that there may have been some premeditated actions taking place for this and other things that may end up being constitutional issues. And if Pashinyan has his guys there, which he definitely wanted to last year, it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen. This may not be good. The Constitutional Court could be stacked in his favor.
Yeah, well, we know at least he got a few the people that he wanted, and he was able to change the president of the Constitutional Court. So, do you know what is the time limit under which the Constitutional Court must hear this issue?
I don't recall. It may not be clear. It may not be as clear as the 5 days, 3 days, things like this, because it's a court. It may drag out, and if it is, that will also be in Pashinyan's favor if he drags it out.
George, what do you think? Was this an attempted coup?
Well, definitely it was not a coup. We never saw any soldiers on ground. We never saw any tanks or any military machines or stuff like that. So this was not a coup. It was just an announcement, and it was a very clear announcement to Pashinyan. And to go back on how we reached to that phase, actually, it's not only about General Khachaturian's dismissal by Pashinyan. Let me remind you that the same story happened in June 2020, when the chief of staff actually he was removed again on a hearsay by a journalist, which later on turned out to be not true. And honestly speaking, in the past 2 years, around 10 generals were dismissed without any reasons, just because they had some issues with Pashinyan. Almost 10. There was never, when you are dismissing a general or a high-ranking officer, at least what you should do is like an internal interrogation to understand what's the reason and to give him the benefit of doubt, because, these are not like a minister or, I don't know, a CEO of a company. They have a career in the military, and once they are out, they don't have anything else. They cannot just go to another army,
Right.
You got what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So there was no questioning. There was no even any these 10 generals. I had their names on my Facebook page. There was never any interrogation of why happened. People didn't know that were these people involved in corruption? Were these people involved in anything wrong they did? And the only reason that we know is that they just had some arguments with Pashinyan. The same story happened in June. Imagine a couple of months before the war started, he dismissed the chief of staff because a journalist had written that the chief of staff had organized a wedding of his daughter, of a big wedding of his daughter, and the chief of staff, he said no, that's not true. It turned out that the wedding was like 38 people had attended that wedding. It was a very small wedding, but the dismissal was done already, unfortunately. So what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? So
George,
when it came to General Khachaturian, just let me continue this because there was something missing in your point. Mm-hmm. When he before dismissing Khachaturian, actually, the MOD issued an announcement saying that this is not true, and the journalist had manipulated with the words. The Ministry of Defense had an official announcement, yet Pashinyan didn't wait for that, and he just dismissed him. So the military, after all what happened in the past 2 years with their officers and generals, and after what happened in the past 3 months, where Pashinyan has been trying to blame them for the war, including Russia. So they had it, and the military, which has been neutral in the past 3 months between the opposition and Pashinyan, they decided to ask for his resignation. So this is how things reached here.
Okay. You've probably kept track of essentially who signed this statement and who didn't from the top brass, but it seems, one article I was reading seemed to mention only four prominent names that are not on this list of signatories. And they seem to be Lieutenant General Andronik Makaryan, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff, Major General 𝐷𝐞𝐻𝐿 Martirosyan, Head of Military Intelligence at the General Staff, Major General Pogos Bogosyan, Head of Armament Department at General Staff, and Lieutenant General Jalal Harutyunyan, who we all know from, the war. The last one, so Jalal is, I believe, under the Minister of Defense and not in the General Staff. So are there any more essential generals who haven't signed this? What can you tell us about these individuals? If Pashinyan succeeds to remove Gasparyan, do you think one of the above will be appointed?
Well, I mean, what you mentioned about Jalal is true. He is in MOD. All the generals and the officers of MOD didn't sign on this announcement. The reason is very clear, not because they don't support it, but because their boss is the minister, who is Pashinyan's guy. So the moment they sign anything, they will be dismissed. But in the case of the chief of staff, he's the boss, and as long as he's not dismissed, everybody will stay in his job. Now, these three individuals, I don't take it very seriously why they didn't sign, because all of them, they are very close to the general of the chief of staff, General Onik Gasparyan. They might have their own personal reasons, or they might have some, I don't know, family reasons. I don't know, but I don't take it very, very seriously. And, dismissing General Gasparyan is the end of Pashinyan himself, because we're talking about 42 plus officers there, highly respected people who are the whole commandership of the army. I mean, you never do that. I mean, this is like you are pushing the army to a military coup, actually. So this is not a case that he can dismiss Onik Gasparyan easily. And actually, this brings us to another issue, that dismissing, what Onik Gasparyan did actually, and proved that dismissing a high-ranking officer is not easy anymore. And now Pashinyan's target is to do everything to remove him from office, because if he failed in doing that, it will bring us to your next topic, actually, NSS and the police. They will be taking a deeper breath, actually.
So with the military firmly positioned against Pashinyan, there are a lot of speculations around the loyalties of the two other power ministries, namely the police and the National Security Service. What do we know about those power ministries? And David, maybe you can start. What can you tell us about the police and NSS? I assume their actions or lack of actions may be critical in the coming days.
Yeah, I may want to defer to George at first, and then I want to come back and talk about a few of these things that we're talking about in general, because it points to a trend. Now, of course, as you know, the NSS, the upper ranks of the NSS were also changed around over the past couple of years, or the past year, I should say. And it always struck me as, people in the NSS should be there because of the history that they bring with them. You don't just dump someone who's been there for a long time or who knows what's going on and puts people with lack of experience. And I do want to talk about the lack of experience. If George could just continue along with this, he probably knows more than I do about these two topics. George?
Well, I mean, when I mentioned 10 generals, I was only talking about the army. Around 6-7 also generals were dismissed from the police and NSS in the past 2 years. Imagine the head of NSS was changed 3 times during the war. 3 times. Can you imagine that? So the same story happened there as well. Now, the funny thing is that since we are in a martial law since the 28th of September, the law says that these forces, the NSS and the police, including the border guards, are under the command of the chief of staff. By law today, they are under the command of the chief of staff.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but because Pashinyan has twisted everything, and he claimed during the war that he's the head, the commander-in-chief. So these forces are still reporting to him. But if you go to the law, and today a lot of lawyers are talking about it actually in the past 2-3 days, By law, it's very clear. It's black and white. These two forces should go under the command of the chief of staff.
So there is another, I guess, constitutional crisis there.
Yeah. If we want to talk about these forces, the police they have like around 2,000, 2 or 3,000 soldiers, and they are mainly we are seeing them in the streets of Yerevan in the past 10 days actually, or 1 week. They are trying to secure the government's or Pashinyan's movement. The NSS is mainly the intelligence unit, and they have a special forces unit, which does the arrests and all that. I mean, I don't want to compare these two with the army, but I can assure you that they will never step up against the army. Actually, at the end, they have a lot of common things in between them, and they usually cooperate together, even if the heads are different. But the army is much more stronger, and they will never go and just stand up to the army.
Okay, this event was covered widely in the international media. The US government issued a carefully worded statement recommending that the military stay out of politics, though they, I think, were careful to spell out that they don't think this is a military coup or a coup attempt. But out of all the international responses, Turkey's response to me was particularly interesting, as it's not often that Turkish high leadership comments on Armenian internal affairs. This time, in the duration of 24 hours, we heard from Turkey's Foreign Minister 𝐶𝐚𝐯, Erdogan's spokesperson, and finally Erdogan himself, to top it off, characterizing the event as an attempted military coup and urging Armenian military to stay out of politics. Interesting, coming from a country that has a tradition of a coup every decade. David, how significant are Turkey's statements, and what do you think is their objective here?
I don't think it's extra nefarious. I do think that Pashinyan basically is Turkey's and Aliyev's man, because Pashinyan has to, he has to finish the mandate that was signed in November, and there is no one else there's no one in the field, either opposition or not opposition or whatever, that can replace Pashinyan if this agreement is going to be fulfilled. And of course, the agreement involves everything, transshipment routes, trying to figure out where the borders are and all these things, and at the same time trying to keep the people from going, from really rising up. There's thousands of young men died, and frankly, I am really surprised that these people haven't got together and engaged in acts of violence. I mean, if I had two sons, if I had any son that was just sent out like this. In fact, you can see them on on television and and on the internet. They aren't complaining. I mean, they're in pain. So it was actually incumbent upon Turkey to make a statement like this. Very simply, there is no other man. There's nothing else. They're basically supporting the end. They're basically supporting the armistice. And the only person that can complete that is Pashinyan.
Let me give another viewpoint on this. For me, the main winner of this war is Turkey, actually. And after that comes Russia. Turkey won this war because, one, they control Azerbaijan. Two, they are having an access to Azerbaijan land access. And three, now they are present in Artsakh. So this was a full victory for them in the past couple of years, if we compare it to their involvement in other countries. Actually, not only 3 times, Hovik. The Turks on 4 levels, they condemned this announcement. And they were the only country condemning this announcement next to Pashinyan. Even the Russian statement or the American statement was very mild in this. And the reason is very simple. They have their interests, and Nikol is the only person who is serving these interests today in Armenia. That's why they are very. They are worried because they know if the military will take over or if the opposition will come into power, everything will change, at least. So that's my take on that.
It's interesting whether everything will change. At least the opposition has stated that they will not go against the November 9 statement.
I think one thing that was interesting, there was also an article this week that said something from Vladimir Putin, mentioning that the agreement is now not possible to stop. I wonder if he was essentially saying that whether it's Pashinyan or the opposition, he knows that the Armenians will continue with the agreement signed on November 10.
Okay, let me correct that. I'm not saying that the agreement will change. The agreement is there, but unfortunately, that agreement has several annexes that we don't know of.
Right.
They were not published, they were not announced, but we are seeing their results. I mean, when the Azerbaijani soldier comes to a post, to an Armenian post, saying that this is ours and your government has agreed to give it to us, and then the soldier says no, but after a couple of hours he gets an order to get out. So there is an agreement there which is not announced.
There is a third agreement that's
even
true.
The opposition, it's not third agreement, actually it's annexes to this November 9 agreement. And what the opposition said that we are not going to change this agreement, but we will take care of anything oil agreement done by Pashinyan himself.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of details still to negotiate. All right, so speaking of the opposition, the Homeland Salvation Movement protest on February 20 indicated that they're still able to bring a significant amount of people to the streets. The language between Vazgen Manukyan-led coalition and the regime is gradually heating up. Last week, I don't know, we covered it, but the member of parliament, 𝐼𝐞𝐸 openly talked about the government's monopoly to shoot protesters should they decide to conquer buildings or whatever was the nuance in his threat was. And this week, the opposition protests continued and seemed to get a boost from the public fight between Pashinyan and the military. But as we said, the military made it clear that they're not supporting the opposition, namely, but they're just sort of asking him to resign. And in Nikol Pashinyan's protest that he held right after attempting to fire Gasparyan, he also promised an end to velvet. And we're constantly hearing the rhetoric ratcheting up. David, where is this rhetoric leading us, in your opinion? I mean, probably not somewhere good, but I wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, at this point right now, the opposition is still talking basically about personalities. This person, that person, this person said this person said that. The issue with the opposition is that when the average person, sees what's going on, they're either in person or they're, watching it on television. I've been there in person. I also watch it on television, whenever. But nothing has really changed in the way the opposition runs in Armenia. Thus, the average person is saying, well, what's our choice? Our choice is either the previous people in some form. I'm not really sure what that form is. It's in some form because it's basically binary. It's either Pashinyan or it's not Pashinyan. If it's not Pashinyan, the type of rhetoric you hear will just turn into, they'll pick this person because at least it's not Pashinyan. It's like, what do you think of Biden? Well, at least Biden's not Trump. I mean, that's not really an answer, which is one of the reasons why the people who are viewing what's going on right now, it's basically a theater. One day it's Pashinyan, one day it's the other guys. It hasn't really changed here in probably 20 years. It hasn't changed. So people get up there and they say, Pashinyan this, Pashinyan that, Haystand, Arans Turker, so on and so forth. Davajan this, Davajan that. So what's going on is the average person is saying, well, it's binary. I either have to, hold my nose and support Pashinyan because the people who were there before are perhaps slightly worse.
David, it seems like Pashinyan has successfully framed the choices that for the Armenian people to be Pashinyan or the formers.
Well, true, but there's some talk that's been starting lately, and I'm actually glad to see some of this discussion, whether it's on Twitter or whatever, is they're talking about that the opposition, or I guess what would be the real opposition that may be forming in the next year or so, may take over from these guys who are just the old people that just get up there and say the same old stories over and over again. It's the same thing. So nothing has changed. And, one of the reasons nothing has changed is because people talk about, their egos or other people's egos. I haven't heard anything, and I've been listening very closely. No one's talked about strategy. No one's talked about policy. Now, I know, when you discuss these things with the public, it has to be put into very simple terms. But, when it's oversimplified, when you say, this guy is a traitor, okay, yes, we get the point. But gee, if you're going to take their position, what are you going to do? We don't know. And I think there is like a class someplace of people who are just sitting back and saying, look, we're just sick of this. We want basically a third option. And that may mean in the meantime that if there was a vote today, it's possible that Pashinyan could get enough to stay in. I don't know. It's got to a point where the way the opposition functions, it has to change.
Asbet, that's an interesting point, because I think that it has been a winning strategy for Pashinyan to present this as a black and white. You're either the corrupt formers or you're with me. But is it in the interests of the opposition to maintain this division? And are they actually trying? Is that what they're trying to do? George, what is your thought? And I believe you've observed some of these protests in person as well. Do you think the opposition is able to get even more people to the street, as some claim is necessary in order to reach their objectives and remove Pashinyan from power?
I think this is the point where I disagree with David, actually. First of all, we need to understand what's going on and why not many people are showing off in these protests. Friends, imagine we have 5,000 casualties and around 10,000 injured people. So we have 15,000 families actually today in Armenia. In the past 3 months, they were busy with their kids. Some families are looking for them because the others are hostages. Some people were dead and they didn't know when they die. Others are injured in hospitals. So 15,000 families. There are approximately 200,000 people with the close relatives. These people today, and I have a lot of people actually, I know a lot of families like that. These people, they are not following any news. They don't care about anything. They just care about their family. They have financial issues. They have paperwork. Just to give you a very small example and how this government failed actually. Funeral for these people. A close friend of mine was martyred on the 5th of October. They found the body on the 30th of December, and his funeral was on the 31st of December. Only on the 20th of January, we got his papers that he's actually dead. And till today, we're now, tomorrow will be the 1st of March, his name is not on the lists even. This government even couldn't manage properly the casualties, let alone about the economy and the war and everything else. Now, back to the opposition. There were a lot of mistakes there, but the opposition has a very clear agenda on this, and they have a very clear strategy on this. And the guy who was chosen to lead the opposition, Vazken Manukyan, he's a person with a very high reputation. He took over Armenia when Armenia had lost the war in the 80s. He was the previous Minister of Defense and then Prime Minister. And he has a clear strategy to stand up the country. We're getting the best experts, government. And, finally, after 3 months, we should stand up. The army has to stand up. And what's happening is, apart from these 200,000 people who are busy with their daily problems, and unfortunately, until today, we still have families who don't know about their kids. We have more than 800 families who are still looking for their kids. This is not a small figure for a small country like Armenia. So apart from the small mistake done by the opposition, I believe there is a very clear strategy on this. But then this fake propaganda by Pashinyan's teams and by the government in, accusing the generals, accusing the Russians, accusing the soldiers, accusing the Iskander. He's accusing everybody except him and his team, which was in charge of this failure. Why he's called traitor? A traitor is a very heavy word, and usually it's a legal word. And here I would agree more or less with David that using it we should be careful. But the amount of proofs that we have of this war, before the war, starting in July, during the war, and after the war, it leads us to the point that there was a big treason here. And 2 days ago, if you remember, today we are Sunday, so Friday evening, when the president met with the generals in a closed meeting for 3 hours, and they showed him all these mistakes done by Nigol himself during the war, when he treated the war like a PlayStation, him and his wife. They were playing with their lives, our kids, during this war. The guy was shocked, and that's what made him to change his mind and not sign that decree. So when people are calling him traitor, it's not one person's opinion here, David. It's the amount of proofs that we have. And I had the status this morning, actually. If we study only the last 10 days before the war, between the 17th of September to the 26th of September, when the government knew exactly when the war will start, and they knew that this was a big war involving Turkey, and for 10 days, nothing was done to prepare the country for. The army was getting prepared since August for this big war. We know we have the proofs, and I'm inside, and I've seen that. But the government never did anything for the past 10 days, to prepare the population, to prepare your food, your warehouse, and a lot of things, even to prepare the diaspora and your diplomatic missions outside Armenia for this war. Nothing was done. On the 21st of September, there was a concert. There was a concert on the 26th of September. A couple of hours before the war, there was a TV interview by Pashinyan. He never mentioned anything about war. All his discussion was about peace and, the opposition and the rumors and the blaming of right and self. So today, unfortunately, we have reached to a stage that Armenia is divided into two camps. There is no third alternative. Whoever is looking for a third alternative, that might happen, as David said, after a year or maybe 2 years. Today, there are two camps, and people have to decide in which camp they are.
And it seems in the coming weeks, the tensions will only increase. On March 1st, the Homeland Salvation Movement is supposed to hold a protest, and they announced the time at 4:30. And just on Saturday, Nikol Pashinyan also announced a protest and a march around the same time. And if the last time was that he held this protest and march is any clue, the procession of the march may actually collide with the opposition rally. And given the advance notice, I'm just seeing that there may be a lot of people on both sides showing up. So let's hope it doesn't devolve into violence. Obviously, the March 1st date is very ominous, but hopefully we don't have another March 1st with blood spilled on the streets.
Yeah, that's another problem, actually, Ovik. This is another big problem here, is that the solution for this in any democratic country is elections. But when they did a social survey and they understood that they don't have a majority anymore, so they said, we're not doing any elections anymore. And his answer was, okay, I'll assemble the people in the streets and we'll just do a protest and we'll show that we are a majority here. And here comes the question. If you are the majority and you are very confident, why not go for elections and to resolve this issue by elections as any democratic country? Not in the street. Now, the opposition cannot be blamed for not having any elections because the opposition doesn't have a say in the decision of the elections. It's the government and the majority which is in the parliament. The election decided to have elections. And this is why we are reaching tomorrow to a stage.
Okay, let's leave it at that, and we'll continue this topic obviously next week. The last topic that I wanted to cover and to close off today's discussion was the news reports around a Boeing 737 jet belonging to Fly Armenia Airways, apparently somehow ending up in Iran. Taking off from Estonia, it was destined for Ukraine. And after a maintenance stop in the United Arab Emirates, it ended up in Iran. And for a long time, there was no word from the Armenian Civil Aviation Authority. But finally, it was leaked by a former advisor to the Prime Minister on aviation. And finally, after that leak, the Civil Aviation Authority was forced to acknowledge that this is happening. The pilots were not Armenian nationals, and the flight path was not officially announced. This is important because there are sanctions against Iran on U.S. Aviation equipment going there. David, do you know more about this issue? How can the government be so out of control on such a considerable issue?
There's quite a few inexperienced and incompetent people that have been placed in power. And one of them is the head of Civil Aviation Committee. Not that
she's the Director General of the Civil Aviation Committee.
Right. It's not that she's a bad person, but whatever. Now, all we're stuck here is with hypothesis. Now, if there was ever a hijacking, the world press goes out of their mind and they report on it. There weren't any reports along these lines. But it is awfully convenient that an aircraft that started off in the West, ended up in Iran. There was no Western reporting. Fly Armenia was a very shady organization. They're the only organization that was allowed to buy and sell aircraft in Armenia, And there was a time where anything that was transported on their flights had zero tax, zero import tax. My top hypothesis is that this is probably a covert action for this plane to end up in Iran, and no one cares about it. No one's talking about sanctions. No one's talking about hijacking. In fact, no one's talking about much of anything. I don't even know where the plane is right now. But all you need is a plane to land in Iran for just a little bit of time, and you can perform a lot of intelligence gathering. That's my top hypothesis, because we don't know anything else. All we know is the 8 articles or something like this, in the Armenian press. That's really about it. Hate to say it.
David, I totally disagree that this was an incompetency, because the civil aviation said we know where it is. It's in Iran, and it's still in Iran.
I think it was a covert operation, even if they are inexperienced. In fact, if they're inexperienced, they could perform the covert activity much easier. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying there has to be something to explain this.
I can explain it to you very simply. I mean, in any country, if a plane disappears, at least they should start an internal investigation. And nothing has started here. Because, you know why? The only logical explanation that the Armenians have sold this plane to the Iranians. As simple as that. It has been sold. And now the Americans are after it because they want to know what happened to their plane. The plane is still in Iran. It never went out of Iran yet.
When you say the Armenians, you actually mean the Fly Armenia operation.
Well, the Fly Armenia, the government, anybody in the government, I don't care. Anybody who was in power could have done something like this.
I mean, this goes beyond the height of incompetence. This is so stupid.
No, this is absolute corruption, actually.
I mean, if that's what it is.
I mean, there is no other explanation for that.
I agree.
And we're not seeing any local investigation starting here. Where is that plane? Again, it's not a dog which was lost in a street somewhere in Gomida.
In 168, the one article was mentioning that 𝐷𝐴 was actually warned that the Fly Armenia operation, in my words, is more of a fly-by-night operation. They're there to swindle airplanes or something like that. And for 2 years, all they did was basically hype themselves, prepare the ground and everything. And now this. And of course, nothing came out of the government, nothing came out of 𝐷𝐴, nothing came out of the Civil Aviation Committee, and a former advisor was the person who informed the newspapers about what the UAE told the Civil Aviation Committee. It's very strange.
Well, Asbed, true. One of the things that I find strange about this is something like a plane going to Iran, Israel would go out of their mind. As it is, they're anti-Armenian, pro-Azerbaijani. I mean, I would think this would be all over the place. I need an explanation. Why isn't Armenia being dragged through the coals? And the one explanation is they wanted this to happen.
I hope we will know at the end what happened to that plane.
Okay. Well, this was an interesting discussion today. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
And that concludes our program for this episode of 𝐾𝐚𝐯 Week in Review. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from this previous week. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at 𝐾𝐚𝐯.org, that's GROONG, and on our Facebook page, ANN-𝐾𝐚𝐯, or in our Facebook group, 𝐾𝐚𝐯-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐵𝐞𝐻𝐚𝐻, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.